So the first thing I'm going to do is run my frequency separation action. So what I'm looking for here is how much of the texture is being removed by the median. So I do that by turning it on and off with the preview. So this is a pretty big image and I don't think 6 is going to do it. I'm going to bump it up to 8 and hit OK. And the second median comes up, which I'm also going to move up to 8 and check it out with the preview. Just want to see a lot of the texture coming off, but not too much. This will just become more intuitive the more you mess around with frequency separation settings. Just turning these on and off continually keeps me coming back to being able to see what I'm going to tackle on the high frequency or low frequency. Mixer brush, incredible for this type of work. I'm just going to start brushing in to this change in contrast area. I'm looking at my brush settings now. I want to make sure that my spacing is actually set up to about 25. I find that works better for gradients. And as you can see, I'm just blending these pixels together. This is a beautiful thing about Mixer Brush for an image like this, is that I can just really quickly, and I've sped this up, I'm going to speed it up to 2 times speed so you can see it really working quickly. I can just blend all these pixels together so easily, and this would be so painful and time consuming if I was trying to clone or dodge and burn. This is just the perfect kind of image to be using the Mixer Brush on. So check this out. In these lighter areas, it was kind of hard to see at first, but these are 2 different hues here. So I kind of scrub back and forth with the Mixer Brush to blend the colors together. And you can see in this area I can move really, really quickly. It's really forgiving because all that texture is sitting right up on top in the high frequency layer. So just poking around the image, just finding different places that look the easiest to clean up. I sort of at this first stage when I'm doing all this work on the low frequency, I'm looking for kind of the big wins, the really large areas of tone that I can take care of really quickly, because once I get that out of the way, I can start looking more closely without distraction at the next level of finer detail or things that I need to fix that may be more technical in nature, and I can just get this heavy lifting out of the way. So taking this to the next step, the next stage of complexity is basically where you start using it almost as if it's a tool for illustration. So what I'm doing here is really cleaning up the hair. So that thing's distracting me, but it's living on the high frequency layer. So I'm going to change to the clone tool and get that out of the way, because I want to keep my high frequency layers turned on while I'm doing this work. It just helps me visualize better. Now what you saw me do there was actually hit R and rotate the image around. And I did that because I'm brushing, on my Wacom tablet with a brush, and it's easier for me to make these strokes when my hand moves a certain direction. So what I do is I rotate the image. You can do that by holding down R and just turning your image around so it's more comfortable for you to paint brush strokes like this. So I've switched to my clone stamp tool, and I'm cloning in some of the texture in the forehead and hair area to get a little bit, to just get that surface in there, because texture needs to be in there for it to look integrated. I want some more texture in the eyebrow. I want to clone from the other eyebrow, but I'm going to flip my clone source in my clone source dialog by hitting that horizontal flip. What that's going to do is the cursor and the clone source no longer move together. They basically move in opposite directions. So that's how you clone horizontally in a mirrored fashion. So flip that back by clicking that icon. And to rotate the image back to its native position, I can just hold down R and hit escape, and it'll go back to the original position. So that's a step in the right direction, getting that hair sort of defined. But some of the splotchiness in the skin is now bugging me and distracting me. So I'm going to work on cleaning some of that splotchiness up, seeing if I can just find places to refine a little bit more, just taking steps toward, eliminating all of the things that make it look super fake, just one by one. So I'm cloning some more of that grain from her skin in there for some added integration. But there's some discoloration in the eyebrow there that's bugging me. And this is a great method for evening out discoloration in skin. I bring up a new layer, call it color, and I'll set the blend mode to color. I'm going to sample from over here on the other eyebrow. And with a low opacity, I'm going to start painting in on that eyebrow. And you can see, since that layer's set to color, it's only going to change the color and not the contrast. And I'll turn on and off here, just that layer, so you can see it fix that discoloration. So what's next? I'm going to see if I can eliminate this this line up here that looks like it was a remnant from the original composite. And you can see how easy that is. I'm just blending back and forth, just eliminating on the low frequency the separation between those two areas of tone and color, and it's just super fast. And then on the high frequency, I'm just going to clone out any indication of that line that was left over. Super fast. Better, but that hairline just looks fake as So I'm going to bring up a new layer because I want to add a little bit of shadow under the hair in there to give it not such a stark contrast between that and the face. So this is why I think of it as a modular system, this frequency separation workflow. I can keep plugging layers inside the layer stack. Any kind of layer. I can put adjustment layers in there. But in this case, I'm going to sample a color from the hair that looks like, there's a little bit of warmth to the fringing on the hair, so I want to preserve that, and just painting in there. I want it a little bit warmer. Just painting in there to just soften that edge and add a little bit of reality, a little bit of volume. It's still rough, but it's just taking steps toward reality. And I know that having some kind of shadow on that under the hair is a step in the right direction. So I had that layer set to darken blend mode because I know that I just really want to darken parts of the skin, and I don't want to accidentally lighten parts of the hair, which I could if I sampled from a lighter area and painted it into the hair if it was set to normal blend mode. So the integration is improving step by step. That's pretty good results in a pretty short amount of time. So what's next? So down here, there's this pipe that is still in the frame, hasn't been cloned out. And I want to extend these fabric folds down. So I'm actually going to keep my high frequency layer turned off because I just want to work on the low. I'm painting these down, but this is actually kind of tough for me to draw a straight line. So I'm going to use something called shift clicking. So change the brush to the non-pressure sensitive, and just usually with a mouse, this is going to work better. Just click once and then hold down shift and click again. Click, shift, click. Click once, shift, hold down shift and click. You can see the steps in there too. Click once, hold down shift, click again. Now you can see how easy it is to smudge things out, to blend things out on a straight line with this shift click technique. It's really, really important to know this. Just clicking once, hold down shift, and click again. So I'm going to change back to my pressure sensitive brush, rotate a little bit to get a better position, and do some more cleanup detail work to these folds. So you can see how easy and actually fun it is to recreate these volumes using the mixer brush. It's perfect for stuff like this. So turning that on and off, pretty big result in a pretty short amount of time. So I'm going to do some texture cleanup in here and get the remnants of that scaffolding out of here, cloning onto the high frequency layer. So that's as far as I'm going to clone that little crease down, because I want it to taper off, and I'm not going to do that with cloning. I'm going to paint that in a minute. I'm going to go back onto the low layer and just do some additional cleanup. Now that I have the high back on, I can see a couple of tweaks I want to make on the low so it integrates. So I'm going to plug in another layer in here to the stack, and I'm going to call it details. This is something that I do in most frequency separations, is I end up having to have a pixel layer called details because I want to paint additional details into the image. And this is an eye-opener for some people, is I can still paint some sharp or fine details into the image underneath the high. So stuff that's in here in the low frequency area doesn't always necessarily have to be blurred out. You can still paint fine details underneath the high with no problem. So just painting in some more creases, and I'm going to clone in a little more texture to some of the softer areas. Once again, pretty big results pretty quickly. What I'm going to do here is remove some of this discoloration in here. This may be a little hard to see on screen, but there's a little bit of blue in there that I used my color layer to remove. So this area of the wall right here in the brown, I want some of those specular highlights, those reflective surfaces to come up, because right now it's easy to see the difference between those two areas, and I think this is going to help it blend a lot more. So I'm just using a regular brush on my details layer, and I just sampled some of that kind of lighter blue-gray, and I can adjust the color to add one more level of highlight. I just increased the luminosity, and so I'm painting just in some little specular details that look like natural reflections in there. And back to the high to clone some of the texture from other areas into that area, because I know that was those were two different areas maybe composited in, or the lighting was different. So all I'm trying to do is just ease the transition between the two areas so it's not so abrupt. Great, so I'm just poking around the image to see where I want to move to next, and I think it's got to be the face because it's still looking pretty creepy. I'm going to show you a method for stripping in texture, because you remember I was cloning earlier and I was just cloning in grain, so why don't I just add grain in there where I want it. So I'm going to run an action that I have that creates a grain layer using the camera raw filter as a smart filter. So you can see the grain in there, it's just sitting over everything. But I want to clip it onto my high frequency. So first thing I need to do is change the blend mode to normal, and Control-Shift-G clips it to my high frequency stack. So you can see, turning it on and off, It basically replaces all of the high frequency information when it's turned on. So the goal here is to create a grain layer that matches the existing grain in the image. And Camera Raw filter, when run as a smart filter in this way, is great because it lets us go in and edit the grain. So I'm going to make tweaks here to the size, to the amount, and hit enter and go back into my image and see if I've got something a little bit closer to the existing grain in the image. It's pretty close in size, but it's a little too sharp. So what I'm going to do is go up to my filter and I'm going to run median on the grain layer as a smart filter. So I'm going to bring it all the way down. It's still a little too strong. It's making it too soft. So I think it's making it too soft. I'm going to turn it on and off. You can see that, you know, it's softening it too much. So I'm going to delete that smart filter, and instead I'm going to run Gaussian blur on this grain layer as a smart filter because it's going to give me finer control at the low ends. And I'm going to bring it all the way down so that I just get a touch of softness back into that grain that will better match the existing grain in the image. Okay, that's a good starting point. It's still a little bit too big, so I'm going to jump back into the Camera Raw filter one more time and just bring the size down a bit more. Okay, so that's closer. That's a good starting point. So the first step is to get close with this grain layer. Just get close and then add a mask, fill it with black to the grain layer, because now what I want to do is start painting in to the mask to reveal the grain. Awesome. So you can probably see here, this is really doing a lot to add to the overall integration. Lots of times that's all it takes, is just adding some tooth, adding some grain, so that the surface of the image is uniform and consistent. Around the eye here in the cheek. So you can probably see there around the eye, I painted over an area of the high frequency that was a detail. It was above her eyelid. It's a crease. So when you do that, when you paint into this grain layer, it basically is replacing the existing high frequency detail. So in areas where there's no meaningful detail, it looks integrated because it's just grain. But if you paint over, you know, say like one of the nostrils or the eyes, the detail that defines it is going to go away. So yeah, around the mouth where it was really quite soft, it needed something there to help that sit in better. So turning it on and off. So it still looks a little different, like the grain is still a little too big and too strong. So that's the great thing about this workflow, is I can go back in and tweak the settings in the Camera Raw smart filter. So this is the downside of this workflow, is you can't see your image while you're tweaking it. So there's a lot of going back and forth. Lots of times I'll zoom into 100% so I can at least see the grain. And this roughness slider does some strange things. At small sizes, it makes it more crispy, and at large sizes, it makes it larger and chunkier. And whoa, that's not right. That's like 5 o'clock shadow. So you can see me going back and forth a lot, and this is a slight pain in the ass, but it's the best I've got. There's no recipe for grain because it's different in every image. So expect to take a number of steps, a number of rounds back and forth, tweaking these numbers to get a feel for what they do and how to get them right. That's still not quite right. I think it needs to be smaller and lighter and keep the roughness where it was at 50. So that's good. The great thing is if I don't like it later, it's totally editable and I can go back and make additional tweaks. Yeah, that's good. That adds a lot to the integration. Overall, better, step in the right direction, but that eyebrow is like super soft now. I'm going to show you how easy it is to just grab high frequency information. I'm going to bring up lasso and I'm going to make a loose selection around this eyebrow because I don't want to paint it. I just want to use that eyebrow. So all I have to do is hit Control C to copy it to the clipboard, new layer, clip it to my stack, Command Shift G, and then just paste it and drag it over. So I'm going to align it with the existing eyebrow. Kind of creepy. It's getting better. That's great detail, but I'm going to show you actually how to protect this object by converting it to a smart object. So I'm going to align it along a horizontal axis, convert it to a smart object, and then Command T. And so now it's a smart object. I can tweak it. I can transform it. I can right click and switch to warp, and I can warp it. And I can keep changing those settings, those transform settings, those warp settings. That's why I like extensive smart object workflows whenever I can use them, because I can go back in and I can change that warp later if I want to. Awesome. So another step in the right direction, although the left side of that eyebrow is still feeling a little bit soft. So I'm going to switch over to my super secret skin texturizer brush. So this is just a brush it's like a texture brush, and I use this all the time for a lot of different things. I'm going to show you the many uses for this skin texturizer brush. So on a low opacity, on my details layer, I'm just going to sample areas of the color of the skin and paint in, and I'm just painting in texture because softness and smudginess in a photographic image is what tips you off that it's fake and it's been photoshopped. So sampling from dark areas of the eyebrow, painting those in, just to bring some life back into that eyebrow to make it look less photoshopped. So I can also use this skin texturizer brush. Well, what it's named for, use it on skin. And so I can selectively paint texture into areas that seem a little too soft and creepy because your eye can tell that they were composited parts. So this is another great tool, is using the smudge tool on the texture that I just created if I feel like it's too sharp and it needs to be softer, because skin has all these different layers of texture, some large splotchy areas of texture matched with finer pore detail on top, and those all combine to create realistic skin. And since this has been composited and worked on a whole bunch, we really need to get that skin tuned up so it starts to look more believable, because people hate photoshopped skin. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good result. So we're getting closer, steps closer. That's what you always want to just continue to strive for. So the face is still creepy, so I'm going to keep working on it, just sampling, and I'm doing some modeling too here. You know, I'm sampling some lighter areas of the skin to try to get a little bit more structure into the face, and it's sometimes helpful to to zoom out as well, so you can see a little bit more with the blur tool. It's a little bit crispy in there. Yeah, I want to define a little bit more in the upper lip and mouth area here, because there is a little bit of a structure that was lost there. So that's pretty awesome. That face is looking more in the realm of believability, but that hair still looks crazy. So I'm going to use the texture brush to refine that a little bit too. I want to reduce this wispy kind of blurry quality from the edges as much as I can, because that's a sure indicator of bad Photoshoppery right there. I kind of call this garbage man work. In retouching, sometimes we get tasked with cleaning up retouching that's been done by someone else that either wasn't finished or was done poorly, or they got too far ahead of themselves and couldn't really finish the job because they didn't have the experience. So that's why I call it garbage man work, is it's taking out the garbage. But it can be very, very challenging and fun to find solutions for things, for problems that have been created earlier in an image's life. So that's good. That's really bringing some life back into the face, and you can see what the components of life in a face are. It's basically surface, it's structure, it's grain. All these tools that we have in Photoshop that we can use to just bring at least a touch of reality back into something that's been heavily composited or photoshopped. So I'm just going to run a little bit more smudging on the face. So this is a great tool, the smudge tool. It not only allows me to blur some of this texture, some of these pixels, but it also allows me to push them around. So human, creepy, human, creepy, a little more human. Let's take a step back and just see overall, that was a pretty short amount of time getting through some pretty heavy lifting using, clone stamps and stuff like that. But one thing that's bugging me still is some of the softness that I've introduced into the wall. So keep in mind that the skin cleaner, the skin texturizer brush rather, is not relegated only to being used on skin. It works for any area of the image that needs some added texture. So keep an eye out for those areas that get too smoothed out, because the skin texturizer brush is going to be the main tool for fixing all of those areas that you smudged out or smoothed too much. So that's great. So you can see too here why I don't just use frequency separation as is. For me, it's a complete framework, a complete environment to work in. And I plug all sorts of different things into frequency separation, from brushes to adjustment layers to pixel layers. And you can also see that working in this way, giving it more time and care than I'm going to on this tutorial, you could reach finished product so much faster. Before frequency separation, a job like this would have been a major pain in the ass. So while I didn't take this image to 100% completion, what I did show you is the 100% complete set of tools and methods that I would continue to use while working on this image over the course of a few hours to get it to a finished state.